Hi, everybody. Today is Tuesday, November 18th, 2025, and our friend Laith Marouf joins us. Welcome back, Laith.
Great to be with you, Nima. Thank you for having me.
Please subscribe and hit like button and follow Laith on freepalestine.video. And let me start, Laith, with what has happened at the UN Security Council. You know, the United States president, the president of the United States, Donald Trump, he praised the UN Security Council for adopting his resolution to establish a so-called international force in Gaza. What is that, and is that practical?
Well, it is the final nail in the coffin of the United Nations. We're back right now to the League of Nations providing mandates of occupation and colonization. We have kind of ended the new colonial era and returned to the colonial era directly. The United States has managed to destroy every Arabic and Muslim country that had any sovereign, decisions and have escaped the colonial era after World War II. And now there's not one Arabic capital that is not directly occupied and or in proxy a vassal of the United States. The fall of Syria was, now we can feel the effects of the fall of Syria, where these Arab vassals and Muslim vassals would speak openly in support of recolonization of Palestine by a Western power. The coup against Imran Khan is another reason that we see this today, where Pakistan, one of the most populous, if the second most populous Muslim country in the world, is supporting this. This is what happens when Indonesia is run by the CIA, and millions of Indonesians were slaughtered over the decades to make sure that Indonesia, as the most populous country, Muslim country, can stand up and without any shame push for this. This is also, the no vote, the abstention of China and Russia on this also shows us the limitations of depending on China and Russia for anti-imperialist work and or liberation of peoples. Since yesterday, I've heard so many excuses by those who support Russia and China unconditionally, claiming that, well, if Mahmoud Abbas, if the Palestinian Authority, if all the Arabic and Muslim states are supporting this, why should China and Russia vote against it? Well, this is, I think, a clear warning to our Latin American brothers and sisters who are seeking, liberation from Western hegemony. I think Russia and China will sit and watch if Cuba is occupied again or attacked to be occupied. They will also sit and watch as Venezuela may be attacked in a minute. And if and when Cuba and Venezuela fall, we will have also China and Russia voting for the recolonization of those countries. And we will be told the same thing to our Latin American brothers and sisters. Well, you can't liberate yourself, and you're not fighting for yourself. And you as Latinos are fighting each other all the time. Why would China and Russia risk their position for you? This is a warning to all our African brothers and sisters who are also seeking liberation, that you should never depend on Russia and China for this liberation. It's not going to come from them. They will not risk anything for you. While the enemy of humanity, the Western imperialists and the Zionists that control them, are willing to commit genocide outright, are willing to spend all their money and their propaganda empire and their influence all to support a genocidal colony like the Zionist colony, and or bring into power Zionists into Venezuela and Mexico and other places. But our supposed new poles that are rising in this supposed multipolar world are not willing to do the same. So this is the facts. There's no denying this anymore. Anyone that denies that Russia and China cannot be dependent on is an enemy of liberation. Number one. Number two, let me be very clear. The Palestinian liberation movement, the movements for liberation in Greater Syria, in Lebanon, in Syria, and Iraq, have survived 2 world wars and the fall of 2 empires, the French and the British, and the fall of the Soviet Union, and the end of the globalization era, and now the fall of all of the previously liberated Arabic and Muslim countries. We will survive that as liberation movements, and we will defeat any occupying force that comes and touches our land, whether it's Israeli, Zionist, or American, or French, or British, whether it will be Turkish, Qatari, Pakistani, or Indonesian. They will be buried in the sands of Palestine, in the sands of Greater Syria. This is a foretold fact that history has shown us. No occupation force, no matter how big, and no weakness of isolation of our people in Greater Syria will ever lead to our permanent occupation. We will be fighting any and everyone, and pity the Arabic and Muslim peoples, pity China, pity Russia, that cannot respect themselves to stand up against the ghouls that we as Palestinians have withstood for 80 years and have withstood a genocide for 2 years. Those armies that China and Russia fear. China and Russia fear the Americans. China and Russia fear the Zionists and their financial powers. We don't fear them, and we will defeat them with or without China's and Russia's help.
Laith, what can we know about the international force that they're talking about? What is the objective of this resolution?
The objective of this resolution is to bring Mahmoud Abbas and his collaborationist Vichy regime into power in Gaza, and to defeat the Palestinian resistance, and to dissolve Palestinian resistance groups and disarm them. Now, let's be very clear. The empire of Zionism, ruled from Washington, D.C. or Tel Aviv, whichever, it doesn't matter at this point, have used all the tools available to them, militarily, financially, propaganda-wise, over the last 2 years. There has been mercenaries from the United Arab Emirates, from Qatar, from Pakistan, from Indonesia, all on the ground. There has been the special forces of the Americans, the British, the Canadians, the French, the Germans on the ground in Gaza. And they haven't been able to defeat the Palestinian resistance. So this is not going to change the military realities on the ground. It's just going to add, give some credibility in the eyes of these imperialists to openly conduct the actions that they've already been taking. So we will now see, given that there's no Syria to stand up for Arab dignity and self-respect, we will see now Saudi maybe sending forces, or Jordan sending forces, or Pakistan sending forces openly. They were already there, but now they're going to be open. And they will be killed openly also by the resistance. This is not going to pass without resistance to it. And they will not be able to achieve anything that the Israelis directly and or the special forces of the empires have been not able to achieve. They cannot achieve what wasn't achieved in 2 years. Now, I think, given that things are becoming more open, yes, I'm very angry at what happened at the Security Council. But in another way to look at it is that now even more things are revealed. I mean, if anybody watched this Security Council debate yesterday, I mean, I personally couldn't believe the level of self-humiliation that all these speakers, other than China and Russia, conducted themselves in. Every one of them opened with thanking Trump, Emperor Trump, thanking America for bringing this. I mean, the funniest of all of those speeches, of course, was the speech of the American representative, who was chastining anyone that will stand against this vote, against this resolution, saying, well, look, all the Arabs and the Palestinian Authority and the Muslims are supporting this. You can't be more Catholic than the Pope. You should be accepting what my house slaves, my Arabic house slaves and my Muslim house slaves have accepted, or you will be against what the people want. This is again the effect of the destruction of Libya, the destruction of Syria, the destruction of Pakistan, that stood all for Arabic, African, and Muslim self-respect. And unfortunately, those countries and those leaders were maligned by much of the supposed progressive or anti-colonialist or liberationist talking heads in the West when those countries stood. I wonder now, anyone that claimed they are supporting of the Muslim Brotherhood, that Turkey and somewhere Qatar are going to liberate Palestine only if Syria falls and stops abusing the Palestinian cause. Look at it today. It was Qatar and Turkey that are calling for an occupation of Gaza on behalf of the Zionists and dismemberment of Hamas, the supposed Muslim Brotherhood wing in Gaza.
You mentioned that China and Russia their argument was somehow different from other countries. What was in their argument that was different?
What their argument was different is that they, of course, pointed the obvious, that there's no talk about a Palestinian state, there's no talk about elections or democracy, and there's no detailed discussion of how you will get to such a thing. But all of the talk is cheap. Today, talk is cheap, is irrelevant. Talk is irrelevant. We have a genocide ongoing, and we have outright colonialism being conducted by the West. So China and Russia can talk as much as they want. It doesn't matter to me anymore. What matters is actions. They could have vetoed. It wouldn't have harmed them in any shape or form, right? But we're like exactly 1947 when the League of Nations was voting to partition Palestine. At the time, China didn't have a seat at the Security Council. China didn't even have a seat at the League of Nations. But the Soviet Union did. And the Soviet Union decided to vote for. It was even worse than now, just abstaining. The Soviet Union voted before even the United States did to support the creation of the Zionist colony. At the time, the argument that the Soviets made, and this is important for our listeners to understand as a historical moment. During World War II, the Jewish communities in Europe were split. Largest part was anti-Zionist, and they were led by the communist Jews, the Bund movement, that conducted armed struggle against the Nazis and were crucial in the actions behind enemy lines to attack the supply routes of the Nazi army as it's moving into the Soviet Union. And when the day came for the vote at the League of Nations about this partition of Palestine, the Communist Central Command, Comenstat, called in members of the Bund to tell them which way they should vote. But they couldn't find one member of the Bund leadership alive. They were all martyred in the battle. And at that point, the Zionists had started a Communist Party of Palestine in Palestine and went to the Soviet Union pretending as Zionists to represent all the Palestinian peoples and the people in the area that are communist. And they told them, oh, well, we're speaking on behalf of the Palestinian and Arabic communists, and we support the partition of Palestine. And that's why the Soviet Union, having no Bund speakers come to persuade them against Zionism, voted for the partition of Palestine. Well, this is a similar moment today. There is no Arabic leadership that is anti-colonialist, anti-imperialist, because they were all killed defending Russia and China's flank in Western Asia and North Africa, keeping the hordes of the empire away from Russia and China. And here we have Russia and China claiming that because the Arabic leadership, the vassal leadership of the West, accepts this recolonization and reoccupation of Palestine, of Gaza, then they're not going to stand in the way of it.
When they're talking about, giving some sort of power to Mahmoud Abbas, Laith, considering the reality, because it seems to me something fictional. Like, there is no relation with what they're talking about and what's the reality in Gaza, in the West Bank. Mahmoud Abbas, who's considered Mahmoud Abbas as the leader of Palestinians? As I don't know, how is that possible? You're talking about removing the power of Hamas. That's not going to happen. And how is that possible? Because you may think of what has happened at the UN, but what's the reality in Gaza, in the West Bank, is totally different from what has happened at the UN. And I don't know how is that going to be practical for these people to somehow to go forward with this idea that they can, Turkey and Qatar, they can decide about what's going on in Gaza without considering the people who are living there, who have been, under this brutal assassination and murder of the Israelis and the genocide. And how is that possible?
Look, this is possible. Of course, none of this is going to come to effect. I mean, they will not be able to occupy Gaza and appoint Mahmoud Abbas. But that's not really the issue. We know that the Zionists and the imperialists are detached from reality. They think of in esoteric, end of time, Armageddon ways. This is how they think. But remember, Mahmoud Abbas and Fatah have been collaborationists since the assassination of Yasser Arafat at the hands of Mahmoud Abbas. The injection of plutonium that killed Arafat came from Mahmoud Abbas and his inner circle, handed to them by the Americans and the Israelis. Now, over the last 2 decades since the death of Arafat, the other Palestinian factions had a chance to either eject Mahmoud Abbas and Fatah from the PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, which is still by international law the only acknowledged true representative of the Palestinian people, not the Palestinian Authority. And they blinked. They didn't want to have a civil war with the collaborationist class. And unfortunately, both Russia and China persuaded Islamic Jihad, Hamas, PFLP, and DFLP not to have a confrontation with Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority and the Fatah. In fact, we remember, of course, the conferences that were held in Beijing and Moscow, bringing together all these Palestinian factions. And up until now, the Palestinian diaspora, which is right now the largest part of the Palestinian people, 2/3 of the Palestinian people are expelled from historic Palestine. The 2/3 of the Palestinian people that are in the diaspora have no representation, neither within those political parties, nor the Palestinian Liberation Organization or the Palestinian Authority. So if there is something to do right now for the Palestinian people to do, it is to reinitialize the liberation struggle from outside occupied Palestine, where the traditional political parties that have been unable to find a way to get rid of Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority don't have control, and therefore these Palestinian diasporas can launch a Palestinian government in exile, can launch an election, can launch a nationalization of every Palestinian that is in the diaspora. And they have an ability to do so. So if there's something that I call upon to the Palestinian people, I say that the Palestinians in the West, in Canada, in the US, in France, in the UK, should be demonstrating at the Palestinian Authority embassies, should be occupying them, should be kicking out the representative of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas collaborationists, from these embassies, and should install their own representation. They should have a census of every Palestinian in the diaspora and issuing passports and nationality, work outside the framework, re-energize the Palestinian liberation movement, create alternative structures to representation where those who are captured by the Zionists cannot represent us.
Laith, if you were to put out what are the the basics, what are the main objectives, what are the main set of rules that could help the Palestinian state, what are those considerations to be put in this UN resolution that could have been somehow acceptable for Palestinians? If you were to mention those in comparison to what has happened at the UN Security Council, what are those points that could have been considered in this resolution?
Yeah, I mean, we can dream about things that could have happened in this colonial structure of the United Nations. I mean, obviously, the United Nations should have, pulled the recognition of the Zionist colony as a whole, as a state, and expelled it from the United Nations. The United Nations should have voted to implement a international force to defeat the Zionist colony, not to come and occupy Gaza. The United Nations should have called for a sanctions and a siege on the Zionist colony, transfer of weapons to the Zionist colony. The United Nations should have readopted the resolution calling Zionism as racism, and should have, of course, called for anyone and everyone to break the siege on Gaza, to bring food and aid. But none of these things would really happen. Just to be very clear, the United Nations has been a curse on most peoples looking for decolonization, or since its foundation. I mean, remember the last, I think the first UN, force, other than the Korea force, was the force that occupied the Congo and was responsible for the assassination of Lumumba and the recolonization of the Congo that has not stopped. The genocide of the Congo, re-establishment of the Belgian genocide of the Congo under UN guise is still there. This UN force is still there, managing the extraction of all the resources of the Congo and the genocide of its people, so it never can stand on its feet. So the UN has never been a force of good. Never. Not once has it been a force of good. The UN is what authorized the occupation of Libya. The UN is what authorized, and by the way, just the day before this vote on Palestine, China and Russia voted for continuous siege of Yemen, sanctions on Yemen. This is China and Russia that we're supposed to be, they're going to be helping us in this multipolar world. So the United Nations is a sham. Peoples in Africa, Latin America, and Asia that don't have the military power to protect themselves will be victims, and China and Russia will watch as you become victims, and will laugh at you when you are not able to defeat the empire by yourself, and say it's your fault that you can't defeat them. Maybe, if we continue on this path, but I'm very optimistic. I feel like my people have brought the whole world into stop over the last 2 years and have shaken the empire of white supremacy like no other movement has. What we've done in Gaza over the last 2 years, the Gaza resistance, the Palestinian resistance, the axis of resistance as a whole, what they have accomplished was not accomplished by the whole Soviet Union in all its history, or China, or anybody else, in the mass exposing of power structures. Even all the education about communism did not educate people as much as the plain spoken resistance of our region that opened all people's eyes and showed us the power structures and defeated the empires, media propaganda machine, and exposed it all. So in a way, I know that we're going to still defeat the empire, but imagine if actually the Palestinians surrender. Imagine if all the other resistance groups and countries in the world are defeated. Do you think China and Russia can survive by themselves? I mean, the US can just blockade them and let them rot behind the wall where they can't trade with anybody. Do you think that Chinese people can eat Russian oil and gas? Or Russians can eat Chinese technology if there's no trade with China and Russia? This is why it's very important for anyone that is listening to me here who calls himself a Chinese patriot or a Russian patriot to understand that Russia and China cannot survive on this planet if the rest of the planet is all controlled by the Western white supremacists. The freedom of China and Russia is dependent on the freedom of peoples in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And I hope somebody will awaken in those leaderships and do something different.
Are we back to square one, Laith, in the Middle East? Are we going to see new wars, new conflicts, new, tensions? Because it seems to me that these Arabs said, I don't know if you've heard that Saudi Arabia is buying F-35 fighter jets from the United States. I don't know who's the enemy of Saudi Arabia and who's going to attack them, and they want to defend themselves because they're spending a lot of money on these weapons coming from the United States. Then they cannot use any of them if uh, I don't see, as you look at the Middle East today, in the West Asia, look at Iran, Saudi Arabia, these Arab states. Who's going to attack Saudi Arabia? Why are they buying these weapons? And are they going to be capable to use them?
Of course, they will not be capable to use them. They will need American pilots to fly them. And of course, part of the contract of the F-35 to every country in this world, by the way, not only to the Saudis, is that the mechanical crew that come with the plane are all American, and you have to pay for their salaries. So the host country of those F-35s cannot touch the innards of this machine. So it's an ongoing payment that you will never end, number one. Number two, I think the sale of F-35s to the Saudis is really just about buttering up the American budget. Most probably those F-35s will not even land in Saudi Arabia. Everybody will pretend that the Saudis bought them, but it's really just money going to the American budget, and there's no F-35s delivered. And the other thought that I have is that, of course, the F-35 is a lemon, meaning it's a really shit piece of equipment that cannot deliver on its supposed, powers. And this reminds me of the Patriot missile system during the Kuwait-Iraq War, the first Gulf War. I was living in Riyadh at the time, the capital of the Saudi Kingdom of Hell. I was a child. And I remember, just before the war, the Patriot Systems was bankrupt, was going to shut down because its missiles were, air defense systems were designed to target jets. There was no more Soviet Union. There was not much need for all the vassals of the West to buy more air defense systems. Therefore, it was bankrupt. So what the West did, what the Americans did specifically, is they forced the Gulf countries to buy all the stock sitting in warehouses of the Patriot missiles. I remember sitting and watching every day as the Iraqi Scud missiles would come. That's when we discovered how bad these systems are. Because the Patriot systems was designed to be a heat seeker that follows the turbine of the jet and hits it, the Scud missile would be coming down, and 6 Patriot missiles would go up, and they would follow its tail. So the missile coming down, and they would go like this and hit, right? If they do hit. And once one of them hits, the other 5 don't have a heat signal to follow. So now the Scud missile has been hit from the back. It's redirected. Instead of hitting a military target, it's going to fall on a residential neighborhood, and that's what happened. And then the other 5 Patriot missiles would actually fall down and make more damage than the Scud missile. And this is how the vast majority of American soldiers died during the Iraq-Kuwait War as victims of Patriot missiles falling on them after they missed their target. Okay, so this is the same situation with the F-35s. The F-35s are a piece of crap. They're being offloaded on the vassals that will never use them in a way to just pay for this bad lemon and to put money into the American budget. You're still on mute.
Okay. Oh. Don't you think, Laith, that they're preparing for maybe a new conflict with Yemen and Iran? Because if they decide to put these F-35s in Saudi Arabia with Qatar and all these bases in the region, they may be preparing for something against Yemen or Iran, because, after all, I don't see Saudi Arabia being capable of using these weapons. They attack, Israelis attack Qatar, they attack Qatar, and nothing happened. You see they're flying above Saudi Arabia and nothing happened. Nothing has happened. Nobody tried to intercept the fighter jets. And how do you see the situation in that direction? Don't you think that if they decide to put these fighter jets, to sell these fighter jets, and they're gonna, Saudi Arabia gonna pay for them, gonna keep everything you know prepared for any attack on Yemen and Iran, and then the United States can use them? Saudi Arabia, as you mentioned, I don't see Saudi Arabia being that much capable of deciding about making any sort of decisions about how to use these fighter jets.
Yeah, I mean, look, of course, there is still going to be a war on Yemen. There's still going to be a possible war on Lebanon. There's still going to be a possible war on Iran. Now, is this going to happen all at once? Will more F-35 stationed in the region make a difference? I don't know. I don't really think so, because, the Iranian and the Yemeni hypersonic missile systems are capable of hitting these bases where these F-35s would be stationed. Now, having said this, I think it's clear, because of the vote 2 days ago to retain the sanctions on Yemen, that there will be a war on Yemen. And of course, China and Russia will do nothing. But it's also, I think, all what we just saw at the Security Council and all what we saw over the last 2 years should prompt Iran to take things more seriously in terms of intervening in internal battles that are happening in the Arabic countries. Iran right now needs the Ansarullah and the government of Sana'a to liberate the rest of Yemen and to assume the legitimate position of being the sole representative of the Yemeni people. Up until now, we have this Aden government that is stationed actually in Riyadh, in the capital of Saudi, who the United Nations and Russia and China acknowledge as the legitimate government. Okay, this needs to go. And the only way that can happen is if Iran intervenes directly in Yemen. It should intervene directly in Yemen. And so, because I don't want to get to a point of seeing Iran falling for the same mistakes that Russia and China, or giving the same excuses that Russia and China are giving. Iran should intervene in Iraq, should defeat the enemies of Iran in Iraq directly, should help appoint a legitimate government that is unchallenged in Iraq before it falls like Syria. These are all important things for us to think about. How can we change this pattern that has been repeating? Can we break the pattern repetition? Can Iran, stop worrying that somebody's going to call it an occupier or interfering in internal issues of Yemen, Iraq, or Lebanon, when the whole world is intervening in the affairs of these countries? Okay, when the whole world is thugs and mercenaries, and you want to be, a priest, that doesn't work. When the whole world are prostitutes and you want to call yourself a virgin, that doesn't work. So it's important at this moment that Iran learns from these mistakes also, and doesn't, find itself surprised when somehow all of the West with the Gulf, combines their efforts to defeat Ansarullah and retake Yemen. Sana'a is the last capital of the Arabic world that actually has some dignity in it. So don't waste it. Iran needs Arab liberationist voices for its own safety. Okay?
Laith, how prepared is Hezbollah today? Because it seems that what's going on in Gaza, what's going on in the Middle East, we're heading toward too much conflicts, and they have to be prepared. And how prepared are they today?
Yesterday there was, I went down south to a town called Mansoure, and it's just second line village on the border of occupied Palestine near Naqoura, on the coast of the Mediterranean. And the Zionists had assassinated the principal of the school in the village the day before. They bombed him as going out from his home to go to the school. The children of the school had a commemoration for him. The whole town had a commemoration for him. And again, today morning, there was attack on a car in Bint Jbeil, another civilian killed. So, yeah, I mean, the war never stopped here. There was an intensification of these Zionist attacks over the last 3 weeks, with up to 3 attacks a day happening on civilian targets. The Lebanese military chief of staff, General Haikal, had a visit to the United States scheduled and was canceled by Trump because, they're calling General Haikal is not kissing the finger, I guess, enough, and is standing for the liberation of Lebanese territory. The UN UNIFIL force came under attack by the Israelis yesterday and the day before. And Markava tank fired on the UN force just beside them. The day before, they fired machine guns and howitzers, whatever, not howitzers, propelled grenades. So that shows you, of course, again, how the UN force will never face off with Israel and will be maybe killed even by the Israelis. The UN force in Gaza is going to be different, by the way. The UN force in Gaza will be empowered to fire at the Palestinians, but not at the Israelis. The UN force in Lebanon doesn't even have that power of firing on the Lebanese people. So, here in Lebanon, we are waiting for the possibility of return to full hostilities, full war scale. And this time, of course, there will be no Syria. This time, of course, the Arab vassals are more emboldened to even side with the Zionists in whatever comes. So Lebanon as a whole is ready for this war. Hezbollah is rearmed, reorganized. Everything is in secret formations, so the Zionists are unable to target any of the new commanders or anything like that. So we'll see what happens if this war breaks out. The most analysts are saying that it's going to happen in the next 2 weeks. Not sure about that, but if it does happen, it's going to be a different war than we saw in 23-24. And the outcome is definitely not foretold. This is going to be a war that may drag in Iran and Yemen and Iraq again. And this time, hopefully, all the members of the Axis of Resistance have learned lessons from the last round.
How do you see the possibility of, bringing these forces from, you mentioned, from Jordan, from Egypt, I don't know, what is the combination of forces in Gaza that they're talking about? These forces coming from, where are what is the nationalities, what are the nationalities of these people who are going to Gaza to to whatever that plan is on the part of Donald Trump and the UN resolution. Who are these people?
I think the draft Security Council resolution didn't have any of those details. And up until now, we haven't heard one of those vassal states say that they are going to be participating in this occupation force and or what forces they will give. Of course, we heard a few weeks ago when all these Muslim vassal countries gathered in Sharm el-Sheikh and kissed the hand of the emperor. We heard at that time, Indonesia claiming that it has 20,000 soldiers ready to enter Gaza. I think there was talk about 2,000 Emiratis or something like that. I'm not sure, I don't remember the exact number that the Pakistanis may have offered during that period. But I don't think it's going to happen in that way. I think the Indonesians or the Pakistanis would be too scared to send their troops to Gaza. I mean, they were scared to send their troops to Yemen. Remember, Pakistan and Indonesia and others were, bribed by the Saudis to try to send forces, and they refused because they were too scared about civil unrest in their own countries. If Pakistan, under this junta military dictatorships, actually sends troops to Palestine, it will be a trigger for a civil war in Pakistan. I'm 100% sure of this. And this is something that I think the junta in Pakistan is too scared of. The situation in Indonesia is not much better either. I mean, part of those colored demonstrations that we saw over the last few months in Indonesia was to tell the leadership of Indonesia, hey, you better follow suit with what we're proposing for Gaza, or you may see a Gen Z or Gen X, or I don't know what they're calling them now, demonstrations that are going to lynch you in the streets like those Nepalese, quote-unquote, demonstrators that lynched the prime minister's wife and the minister's wives in the middle of the streets. Okay, this is the threat to any leaders in the world by the United States that think that they can be a little bit sovereign. So I don't know what will happen in Indonesia. Definitely there is huge pro-Palestinian sentiments in the country of Indonesia. Up until now, all opposition to the state has been, other than in East Timor and in Papua New Guinea, there hasn't been armed resistance in Indonesia since the assassination of Sukarno and the killing of the communist members of the Communist Party in Indonesia. So we'll see what happens there. But I believe in the end, the West will have to send their own troops openly. They can't depend on these states. They just wanted the fig leaf of having these Arab and Muslim vassals approve this plan in order to claim that they are speaking on behalf of the Arabs and the Muslims as colonial powers.
I think that's the problem, Laith. That is the problem. After all, we see that the American troops or Western troops coming to Gaza, that would be hugely problematic. They can be used against Lebanon. They can be used against the region. They're not. You cannot talk about Gaza without considering what's going on in southern part of Syria, in southern part of Lebanon. It's all connected. And if you're not there to address the main issue with the Israeli government, you're not going to solve anything. After all, I don't see that. I have no hope in what's going on, and they're not going to achieve anything, and we're heading toward more conflicts.
And it would be great to see American soldiers dead on the sands of Gaza, as we saw them dead on the sands of Beirut in 1982. Maybe having American soldiers and British soldiers and French soldiers killed directly in the battle here will entice the American and British and French public to rise up against the dictatorships that govern them, these Zionist elite that are wasting the power of their countries to maintain this colony. I hope that they come. I actually want them to come. I am, as a Palestinian, as an Arab, I'm sick of having to fight the house slave Jewish supremacist. I want to see the master on the ground. I want to kick the master in the face. I'm done with having to fight Saudi Wahhabi death squads. Come, master, come. Let's see how you can fight. Can you achieve what your Zionist and Wahhabi house slaves couldn't achieve? Come, let's show you. What does it mean to be a true man, to be a true sovereign? Let's see. Or will America and France and the UK resort to killing children because they're all cowards like their Zionist and Wahhabi death squads? This is. I think things are right now. It's great that things are in the open, and it will be even greater if everybody's done with this liberal talk. That we all understand that we're now in a full colonial era, 100%. And all talk about multipolarity, globalizations, coexistence is gone. Is gone. There's no multipolarity when the US can colonize openly countries. I hope this awakening encompasses the whole planet and everybody can understand what we already understand here on the ground.
Thank you so much, Laith, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always, brother.
Great to be with you, Nima. See you next week.
See you next week. Bye-bye.